Be to God. You may be seated. Our kids can be dismissed. There's great stuff for them down the hall. To the rest of you, thank you so much for being here at the 11:15 service at Community Christian Church. We are in the second week of our annual VBS series. You can tell we're in the middle of VBS here. We're leading up to it. And what we do is we take the daily lessons that the kids are going to learn about during the VBS week, and we explore them on an adult level on the Sunday mornings leading up to VBS. And so this year's theme, as you can see, is on the case. Because the spiritual journey sometimes is a mystery. Like, what does it really mean to make Jesus Lord? What does it mean to really follow Him? What does it mean to grow in our faith? And sometimes that can be confusing. So we're on the case, right? And Jesus helps us with this mystery. He makes the mystery of God's kingdom easier for us to understand by giving us great stories called parables. And we talked about this last week, but a parable is just a word made up of two Greek words, one para, which means alongside, and the other balo, which means to throw. And so a parable is literally a truth that is thrown alongside something else. So what Jesus would do is He would take very ordinary things from everyday life, a wedding, a mustard seed, a tree, a landowner, a pearl, a lost coin, and He would use these ordinary things in story form to communicate a truth. And so this is the way we'll say it every week. A parable is an earthly story with a heavenly meaning. And today's parable is a wealthy landowner who plans to be away from his affairs for long enough that he needs some help. He thinks to himself, I need some people to help me manage my estate, my wealth, while I'm gone. And so he calls in 3 of his trusted servants, and to each of them he gives bags of silver. That's the way we just read it. Now, when our kids hear this story, they're going to be taught that the man handed out bags of gold. Now, that just sounds better, right? Gold. It needs to be gold. There's something right about it being bags of gold. But the NLT says silver. Actually, the most common word that you will encounter in some of your versions that you're reading out there is the word talent. The ESV says the man entrusted his servants with his property by way of talents. He handed out talents. Now we have a very strong idea that floats to the surface when we hear that word talent. Talent to us is natural abilities. It is the aptitudes that people have. Some of you have the talent of sleeping. You can do it with your eyes closed. I have the talent that I can always tell what's in a wrapped box. It's a gift. But talent here, something different. In Jesus' day, it was a measure of weight. It was a monetary currency. And just like we have in our own currencies, ones and tens and 20s and $100 bills, one of the lowest currency units in Jesus' day was a denarius, and it was about a day's wage. The highest currency unit in his day was a talent, and a talent was worth 6,000 times a denarius. And so this man is giving out talents. And so at the heart of this story is money. There's no way around that. There's no disputing that. The confusion comes from the fact that we plucked this word talenton out of the Greek language and we adopted it into the English language. And so talent for us means this idea of abilities and aptitudes. But talent first meant only money. In our minds, one has eclipsed the other. But at its core, a talent just means money. When the last servant gets his bag, his talent, the text says in verse 18 that he went out and he hid what? What did he hide? Did he hide his comedic ability? No. He hid his master's money. That's what we're talking about. And so as we talk about talents today, the idea of a talent can very easily and rightly symbolize more than money, but it is not less than money. A talent was 15 to 20 years worth of a typical wage. And so if we keep the math really easy and just work from, let's say, a wage of $50,000, then one talent could be about $1 million. I mean, think about that. And so this master is going away, and he calls his servants in, and to the first he gives 5 talents. Do the math. $5 million. To the second, He gives 2 talents. Do the math. That's $2 million. The third servant is given 1 talent, and we've already done that math. It's $1 million. And each of them is given different amounts, and we are told why. They are given disproportionate bags of gold that remain in proportion to their abilities. So the master saw something in the first servant that he did not see in the second and the third. And so the first got 5, and the second got 2, and the last got 1. It would be like if we all go to the gym for the very first time, and we all have the same coach, and the coach leading the class would be doing us a disservice. Actually, she would be putting us in harm's way and risking injury to us if she had every one of us lift the same weight as somebody who had been working out in the gym for a decade. A good coach would never do that, right? A good coach is going to give us something to lift that is in accordance with our capacity, and that will be different for each one of us. For maybe 2 of us in the room, it might mean bench pressing 150 pounds. Some of us might be able to do 80 pounds. A lot of us might only be able to lift the bar with no weight at all, okay? But even these amounts, even though they're different based on capacity, I want you to understand the guy who gets the least still gets $1 million. Who would turn that down? Now, if you paid attention last week at how Jesus interpreted parables, then you might be already a little ahead of where I'm going here. But who is the landowner in the story? Well, it's Jesus, right? Or we could say it's God, either one. And who are the servants in the story? Well, we all are. And what is the gift that God gives to all of us? The answer is talents, abilities, aptitudes, resources. And talents can be more than money, but it's definitely not less than money. And one of the things that should grab your attention right away as we jump into the story is how generous God is to us, His servants. The amount given is amazingly high. It is shockingly high. And we should just pause a second and remind ourselves how big the gift is that Jesus has given to us. Because every one of us owed a debt of sin that was equivalent to thousands of talents. In fact, in chapter 18, Jesus tells the parable of the unforgiving servant. And in that parable, he tells of a guy who owed 10,000 talents to a king. And I didn't even want to do the math on 10,000 talents, but I did because I've got a calculator on my phone. And it came up this, 1E10. You know what that means? It means it's way too high for even the calculator to put into numbers. But it's 1 with 10 zeros after it, or $10 billion. That's what he owed. It was a debt that he could never in a zillion years repay. And our sin debt is like that. We have wronged God, we have rebelled against Him, and there's nothing we can do in this life to make up for it. We owe God an amount so astronomically huge that there is nothing we can do to settle our debt. We are hopelessly in debt with no way to repay it, and yet Jesus steps in, and He pays it for us. He gives us the gift of forgiveness. He gives us the gift of reconciliation. He's paid our debt by spilling His blood on the cross. And not only has He canceled our zillion-dollar sin debt with God, but He also He gives us all the capital that we need to be able to work in His service on this earth until He comes back. Each of us, according to our capacity, is given talents. Again, it can be more than money, but it's definitely not less than money. And that gift should cause us to stop in our tracks and love the Master all the more. When you consider what these servants went through, it's amazing. In a blink, these servants go from working in the estate and taking direction, and just that fast, they go to working on the estate and giving all the direction. And it is hard to underscore the difference from when they sat down with the Master to when they walked out. But the change in circumstance and station would have been way more than they could have ever comprehended. And is that not the same with a person who is drawn to Jesus and called and who accepts his gift? In the twinkle of an eye, a person goes from death to life. A person who is lost is now found. A soul that was in prison because of sin is now free in Christ. One who was an orphan in the world and abandoned is now adopted into God's family as a loved child. And that change happens when God, in His good grace, offers the gift of salvation to a soul, and that soul receives it. God's incredible gifts to us demand our worship and our praise, and they also demand a certain responsibility. And there's an appropriate way to respond to the gift, and we learn what that is. Look at verse 16. The first servant who received 5 talents began to do what? He began to invest the money. I like the ESV better. It says he went at once, and he began to trade the talents. It means that he took the money and he did things with the money that were profitable. Maybe he bought real estate. Maybe he started a business. Maybe he bought stock. Maybe he did all 3. Whatever it was, he went at once and he did it. Now that sounds to me like a guy who already has a plan. He just needed the capital. Maybe that's why the master gave him the most bags of gold. Right away, we understand what the master is up to. Here's my estate. Here are my resources. Here's all my capital, and I'm not going to be around for a while, and so I need you to take these talents, and one day I'm going to come back, and I will settle up with you. This is still my money, but in the meantime, I want you to do all you can between now and then to give back better than you were given. You've learned that lesson, right? Somebody taught you that along the way. When you borrow something from somebody, make sure they get it back in better condition than when you got it. And so when you borrow the car, you fill up the tank before you take it back. Leave it better than you found it, right? When you're shooting fireworks in the street, you go and pick up the trash. Leave it better than you found it. When you're on the green at the golf course, you fix your ball mark and you fix somebody else's too. Leave it better than you found it. That's what the master is after here. And the guy with the 5 bags did exactly that. All of his investments and businesses had profited enough that he actually doubled the master's money. He started with 5, and he was able to make 5 more. Verse 17 tells us that the servant who got 2 bags of gold did exactly the same. He went to work, and the result was the same as the first servant. He is able to double his master's money. He started with 2, and he's able to make wise decisions, and he's able to make 2 more. Verse 18 begins with but. And that means that whatever the third servant is going to do, it's not going to be what the first 2 just did. And sure enough, the servant who got 1 bag of gold has no plan for it. He doesn't want anything to do with it, and so he just goes and buries his 1 bag of gold in the ground, and you can almost see him wringing his hands of the whole ordeal as he puts the last shovel of dirt in the hole there. It's off my plate. No need to worry about that hassle anymore. I'm done. I want you to underline or highlight in your Bible verse 19, because this is the hinge verse. It's the most important one in the parable. It says, after a long time. It was so long that the servants probably began to wonder if the master would ever come back. After a long time, the master came back. He calls each servant in to give an account. He asks, what did you do with the talents that I gave you? And the man with 5 bags of gold steps up with 10. He says, you gave me 5, and I was able to invest well and be productive through business and ventures and acquisitions, and now I have 5 more to give you. Here's 10. The man entrusted with 2 bags steps forward. Same result. You gave me 2 bags to start with. I worked hard. I've made 2 more. Here's 4. And look at the master's response to these first 2 servants. It's exactly the same. He gives it twice in verse 21 and 23. He says, well done. Well done, my good and faithful servant. You have been faithful in handling this small amount. And so now I will give you many more responsibilities. Let's celebrate together. I like the Message version. It says, let's be partners from now on. And this is great, right? But there's something about it that seems off to us. Shouldn't the guy who returned more be rewarded more? Shouldn't the guy who returned less be rewarded less? But they both received the same reward. Well done to both of these guys. Good and faithful servant to both. Why? Because they both returned an amount in proportion to what they had been given. A great way to get a hold of this is to think about engines. I need you to pretend just for a second that you're an engine. What kind would you be? To some of us, God gives 8 cylinders, and we're trucking down the road, man. To some of us, God gives 6 cylinders. We're going at a pretty good clip. Some of us are just 4 bangers, going down the road. Some of us are 2-cycle weed eaters. And the point is, thank you. I don't know where that came from. Here's the thing, God doesn't care. God doesn't care how many cylinders you have. He only cares that you're hitting on all the cylinders that you were given. That's it. We all have different capacities, and that's okay, because that's not the measure of our success. The measure for success is, have you been faithful to your capacity? I want you to take an inventory at this part of the parable. What have you done with what God has given you? Have you been faithful with your talents? And again, it can mean more than money, but it cannot mean less. There are some 5-bag people in the room. If you're a 5-bag person, have you been faithful? Because you've been given more than most. Have you leveraged your great gifts so that God's kingdom has received the benefit? For most of us, we're 2-bag people. And we've been given wonderful gifts, useful gifts, gifts that if they are not used, the kingdom of God loses out. And so our temptation with 2 bags is to look at the people with 5 on one hand and say, oh, I don't have 5, so, man, my little 2 bags down here aren't going to make a difference like the person with 5. And we begin to resent maybe the person with 5, and we decide to do nothing. On the other hand, the temptation also for us with 2 bags is to look down at the people with only 1 and get a little puffed up, right? Because I have something more significant in my own eyes than them, and I can condescend to the 1-bag person, and I end up doing nothing. And we can stumble into these 2 traps when we fail to see from the Master's point of view. What is his concern? What is his test when he calls them to account? It's not what you have, it's have you been faithful with what you have? The world around you will always ask this question, what do you own? Success in the world's eyes is a house with a theater room. It's a boat that actually has a kitchen underneath the deck, right? It's a third home. It's a second home in the mountains. It's a third home on the beach. That's what the world asks. What do you own? What do you own? That's the only thing that will impress the world. But Jesus' question is different. It's not what do you own, it's how did you use it? How did you use it? What did you do with the talents I gave you? What came of all the bags of gold that I entrusted to your care? Jesus will never condemn you for what you were not given. You're only accountable for using what you were given. Possibly the most instructive part of the parable is the last servant and his 1 talent that he went off and buried in the ground. And I want you to listen to the change in tone as he tells about what he did with his talents. He says this, Master, I knew you were a harsh man, harvesting crops where you didn't plant and gathering crops you didn't cultivate. I was afraid that I would lose your money. So I went and hid it in the earth. And here it is. Here's your money back. And you can hear the difference, can't you? The first 2 basically walked in and thanked their master for the initial gift. Look, you gave us this, and now look what we were able to do with it. But this last servant goes right to excuses for his inability to achieve anything. You're a harsh, demanding man, and I was afraid I would lose your money, so I went and buried it in the ground. Here it is. The master was after his servants to take the gifts he gave them and return them better than they found them, but this guy didn't even try. And here's where we ask, why? Why in the world? Why didn't this guy go at once and begin to trade his $1 million like the guy with $5 million? What's going on? Here's the answer. He did not know his master. Look at what he's claiming. He's claiming that his master is a harsh man, a demanding man. He even hints here that his master is a greedy man. He levies the accusation that the master reaps from places that he's never sown. That sounds like extortion to me. He's characterizing the master as an exploitive, demanding rent seeker, as a mob boss. Is that true of the master? Is that what we know of the master? And do you see it? He's saying, I wasn't able to do anything with the talents you gave me, not because of my fault, because of you. You, master, are the reason that I buried the money. And so here it is. Yes, it's lost some value because it's been in a hole rather than in a venture somewhere or an investment. But here it is. It's really your fault that it's not more. And the words he speaks are betrayed by the truth that is in his own hand. The accusation is that the master hasn't ever given anything to anyone. And he makes that allegation as he holds the gift that only a generous, loving, trusting master would ever dare give, a bag of gold worth 20 years of wages. He casts the master as only as demanding, never giving, and that's really all the evidence we need to know that this servant never really knew the master. Whatever we can say about God, the criticism that he only takes and never gives is as baseless as they come. Is there anywhere in the world that God has not sown and planted? Is there anywhere in the world that God has not scattered seeds of goodness from his rich hand? God gives us everything we have. You can only complain to God because he gave you lips and a tongue to do it with. You can only reject God logically in your mind because he gave you a mind to think with. You can only push God away in your heart because he gave you a heart to feel with in the first place. There is no place in the whole wide universe of God where his love has not scattered gifts. There are no fields of his that are unseeded or neglected. And we should know that about this generous God. He never asks where he has not given, and he never asks until he has given. And the servant didn't know that. He didn't know his master. Because he did not know his master, the reward that he got for burying his bag of gold makes perfect sense. Look at it. I've highlighted some key phrases. He says, "You wicked, lazy servant." He said, let's pretend your characterization of me is right, that I'm nothing but demanding, never giving, only taking. If you really think that that's who I am, then burying the money is the last thing you should have done. At the very least, you should have taken it to the bank to earn some interest. And so here's the reward that the master gives for him doing nothing with his gift. Take it away. And listen, that's what he wanted in the first place. He went and buried it. He wanted to be rid of the gift. That's why he buried it. And so the master gives him what he wants. Take it away. Give it to the one who has 10. Talents, again, can mean way more than money, but certainly not less. Talents used faithfully are multiplied, but talents not used are taken away. And then second, he says this, throw this useless servant out into the outer darkness. And I want to suggest again that that's where he is anyway. He never wanted to really know the master. He never loved the master, even when the master gave him everything. He just shook his fist at the master. He walked away. He chose to alienate himself from the master. So the master gave him what he wanted. Throw him out. I will calm your hearts that during our VBS week, this verse is cut out. I guess we don't want any kindergartners out in the outer darkness gnashing teeth, right? That would be bad. But it's fitting here, right?
Jesus is just giving this man what he wants. He had no interest in serving anyone but himself. He had no concern knowing the master or believing the master or serving the master. If he did, he would have used the gift. And so the verdict shouldn't surprise us. Throw this servant into the outer darkness because that's where he's already chosen to be. Oh man. Inventory time one more time. God gives gifts to us all. He rewards us all according to how we use what is given to us. And he's away, and oh man, it seems like such a long time that the master has been away. It's so long that it seems like he will never come back. And then one day, gradually, then suddenly, right? One day, he's back. And when that day comes, he will ask every one of us, what did you do with the talents I gave you? And it's way more than money, but it's not less. What did you do with the ability to love and to care and to serve? What did you do with the capacity to study and teach and instruct? What did you do with the capacity and the aptitude to organize and administrate and lead so that God's kingdom would be left better than you found it? What did you do? And it's at the very least, taking the bag of gold that God gives you in this life, whatever size it happens to be, and leveraging it through tithes, through offerings, through investments, through business, through trade, to make God's kingdom better than it was before. Rob was an Air Force pilot during the first Iraq War, and he had just flown his 300th mission, and he was unexpectedly and pretty surprisingly granted permission to pull his crew together and fly his plane home. And so that's what he did. They flew across the ocean to Massachusetts. They landed there. They had a long drive to western Pennsylvania, where they were all from. They drove all night, and when his buddies dropped him off at the driveway, just after sunup, there was another surprise. There was a big banner across the garage. It read, "Welcome home, Dad." And he was like, how did they know? Like, no one called. This was a surprise that we were even coming home. We didn't know we'd leave so quickly. He walked into the house. His kids were up. They were dressed. They ran to him. They screamed, "Daddy." His wife, Susan, is coming down the hall. She's running down the hall, and he said she looked terrific. Her hair was fixed. This is sunrise. Her hair is fixed. Her makeup is on. She's wearing a crisp yellow dress. It was like his whole family knew that he would be walking through the door at that very minute. And he asked his wife, "How did you know? How in the world did you know?" Through tears of joy, she said, "I didn't know. But once we learned the war was over, we knew you'd be home one of these days. We also knew that you'd try to surprise us, so we were just ready every day." What's the verse I told you to highlight? Verse 19. After a long time, the master returned. Jesus has been gone for a while now. But he will come back. He will return. Believe that. One day, he's going to show up in the driveway. He's going to walk through the door, and he's going to ask, "What have you been up to while I was away?" And are you ready for that day every day? That's the question. And the answer is found in how you're using what he gave you to use. Bury it. That's how you push him away. Use it to make the kingdom better than you found it. That's how you love him. That's how you serve him while he's gone. I know of one thing that every one of us has been given in this room. It is the capacity, it is the ability to worship this generous God who gives us everything we have.